Hey, this is Jim Hughes, and I'm going to do a little walkthrough of Peasant's Quest. This is a narrative game in the WebQuest Narrative Games 2. I'm doing this for a reason, and that is that I am not historically a gamer, and given that, my experience of the game is very different from those who have previous experience with video games, and particularly with narrative video games. So, I'm wanting to communicate what it's like to be a non-gamer who has never played a narrative video game before. I've never played this game before, and what my experience is playing it for the first time. So, let's play the game. Okay, I won't waste any time on this. We know why we're here. Trogdor, the dragon, has burned down our hut, so we're going to take revenge. And we're on our way to Trogdor's lair, and the first person we meet is the knight. Now, at this point, I'd like to clarify that I've actually spent hours with this game by now. The first time I played it, I took some audio notes on my iPhone as I went along to try to record rather in real time what I was running into, and I can reflect that here. Now, after having that very frustrating experience, I went to YouTube and I located some video walkthroughs, and I walked through the game with someone who was experienced with it, and they demonstrated how to achieve the objectives, how to win the game. So, having been previously very frustrated by not being able to even locate a hint of how to reach the objectives of the game, and then following that up with understanding how to achieve the objectives one step at a time, I could see clearly where many problem areas were for the newcomer. Now, it's obvious to me that this is clearly important because in this context, we are learning how to gamify or develop video games or use video games to teach. And given that, both our objectives and our audience are very different. In fact, I think this is an excellent example of what we studied in 501 about the digital divide. Our audience may not be technically literate, or they may not be as technically literate as other players. They may not have any experience with video games at all, or they may not have any experience with this type of video game, or they may have only a little bit of experience. Now, I'm not a complete newbie to video games. I just don't play them for hours every day. But so I was around when video games were invented. Back in the 1970s and the 1980s and the arcade games and all of those things that we've been talking about. I've played those games for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I have two children in their late 20s and early 30s, and I've played video games with them throughout the 80s and the 90s, and so I'm familiar with the evolution of the video games. I've watched them from the time they were invented up until now. So I'm not completely new to video games. However, I have spent many years now in a place in my life where video games were not part of my life. So actually for me, it's rather like comparing the past and the present and being able to do that with a strong contrast because I remember how video games were and now they are very, very different. They are much more sophisticated. And now I am interacting with them from an educator's perspective. So I'm reflecting on learning theory, and I'm thinking about instructional design, and I'm thinking about how the media communicates to the learner, etc. So this is where I'm coming from as I'm playing this game. So now I have a direct comparison between what it's like to play this game and not know how it works, and play the game and know how it works. And personally, I think it's educational to see that in action. So, here we go. I knew from the initial set of instructions that I needed to type in what it was that I wanted to do. And it said if you encounter a person, type talk and whatever you think, talk to the man or talk to the monster, talk to whatever. So, I typed talk to the knight. and then I got a series of messages that communicated the nature of this quest. Now, at this point, I knew that it was important to remember what was being said right here, so I took a screen capture of these instructions, and along with the initial instructions, I printed these out and kept them by my side for reference. Now, right here, we've got a very good example of the importance of good communication skills. Using language to effectively communicate what we want our audience to understand. Now, this very first sentence threw me because it says, look around by typing stuff like look tree or just plain look. Now, what the person who wrote this is intending to say here is get information about things in the vicinity by typing the word look followed by whatever it is you want information about. A tree, a bush, a rock, whatever. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because it became important later when a different set of instructions was presented that conflicted with that sentence. And that conflict was created by a couple of communication problems. One was the way it was worded, and the other was the use of capital letters. You see here that about halfway down the page, it says type lowercase inv to see your inventory, and the word inventory is in all caps. Directly below that it says type lowercase save to save your game, and the word save is in lowercase, and load lowercase load to load one, and the word load is in lowercase. Now again, this inconsistent usage didn't become apparent or even an issue until a couple of screens later, because in this screen, everything that is supposed to be typed in is in capital letters to bring attention to it. Look, talk, help, save, load, and then there's another inconsistency. It's not INV, it's the whole word inventory. Now, in addition to this, there's another confusing element here. It says, talk to everyone you see and ask about stuff. And ask about is in capital letters. And if there's any consistency here, that appears to mean type in ask about. Now at this point, I have not entered the gameplay yet. So I'm getting a little confused here about the difference between look and ask about. Ask about makes sense. Ask about a rock, ask about a hut, ask about the berries, ask about whatever. That makes sense. Look, I see myself looking with my eyes. I'm looking around. Look doesn't mean inquire. Look means look. Ask means inquire. Ask means ask about. So I attached myself to ask about as what I should key in to find out information about things, because that makes sense to me. Mind you, this is where the player is first learning how to interpret the interface and how to manipulate the game. Okay, so having read through these instructions, and I printed them out for reference, I proceeded to play the game. I find myself asking two questions. Number one, given that the little man walked himself over to this position, how do I control the character? Now, experienced gamers would say, oh, well, you're supposed to use the arrow keys. That's obvious. Well, no, not necessarily. It's important not to make assumptions about what the user of the game knows or doesn't know, especially in the preliminary stages of a game when you're explaining to the player how to interact with the game. Now, that dawned on me pretty quickly, but I stalled on it for just a second because I don't play this type of video game all the time, and that's not muscle memory. That's not a habit. Now, the other thing that occurs to me almost immediately is, based on what the knight has said, I need to be dressed like a peasant, I need to smell like a peasant, and I need to be on fire like a peasant, which doesn't make any sense to me, but there it is. The knight makes that as a very clear statement. So that's my objective. I'm clear on that, but what do I do now? This is a quest. I have a goal, something I'm trying to do. So my brain is saying, what now? In the interest of time, I'm going to push the pause button here, and I'll continue with a more detailed examination later. I must say that the Peasant's quest has been not only a frustrating experience, but a very educational one. At the beginning of the gameplay, I just began to walk around and explore the environment. In pretty short order, I got a mental picture of what this environment looked like, what was located where, and I got feedback from objects and people along the way. But I was unable to find anything that would lead me to be able to achieve the objectives that the knight had given me. After exploring the game for quite some time, I went to YouTube and I found the walkthrough video, and the demonstrator showed how to play this game in such a way that the objectives were achieved. And as I said, I took careful notes along the way before I understood the game and after. And I'll share those more with video later. This is Jim Hughes. Thanks for watching, and I will be back.